Did you know that Hoid appears in nearly every Cosmere story? If you did, can you identify each of them? There are a couple small cases where he's not included, such as stories that were published with adventure games, but he has at least a cameo in every major publication in Sanderson's connected universe. Today we'll go through each appearance of Hoid in each prose story, and what you should look out for in other books to find him yourself. If you haven't read all of the Cosmere published as of December 2025, that's okay. You can skip ahead to the stories you have read to review those cameos by using the chapters of this video. At the end, there will be connections across stories, so pay attention to which books you need to have read there. Alright, let's play Where's Hoid? Hoid appears in the background of most Cosmere stories to date, though he has more central roles in several novels. Hoid has an uncanny ability to know when and where to be, but not always why he needs to be there. This is how he shows up in each of the stories, with varying importance to his role. In some cases, his name is mentioned directly, but in others, only his appearance is described, or one of his aliases is used. That appearance description usually includes characterizing his face as hawkish. While that term isn't reserved for Hoid, it's usually a good tell that you found him, especially if he's recounting a story or doing something mystical. He is a master of disguise though, so his face is not a surefire way to pick him out either, and aspects like his hair could be white or black and maybe anything in between. If you see a reference to a character with a weird name or title, it's a good bet. Just don't say it's guaranteed. There are plenty of people in the Cosmere looking for such an easy way to find him too. Okay, let's start with Hoid's appearances in the Mistborn series. In the original Mistborn novel published in 2006, Hoid is the informant in Luthadel who Kelsier uses to gather intel, before he poses as an informant himself to Strath Venture. Acting as an informant, Hoid confirms that rumors are spreading about Renew gathering weapons, rumors which Kelsier set in motion. Hoid disguises himself as blind or sickly, but Kelsier determines that's a ruse when he leaves a coin on the ground as a steel-pushing anchor, and Hoid easily finds it and picks it up. Kelsier even files this disguise trick away for his own use with Strath. Hoid's cameo in the second book of the Mistborn series is far less apparent, and is considered one of the more difficult to spot, especially on first read. In this case, Hoid is the old terrace man Elend speaks with on his way back to Luthadel. Elend realizes something is off about the Elder and doesn't dwell on it before continuing back to the city, but no other details are giveaways that this is our intrepid world hopper. This role has been confirmed by Sanderson on a few occasions now. In the climactic finish to the original Mistborn trilogy, Hoid acts as an informant again, this time in Fadric City. After Vin infiltrates the city to speak with another informant, Slowswift, she intends to meet with Hoid as well, not knowing about his previous interactions with the crew. However, when she approaches, she gets a sensation that there is a Mistborn nearby, so she retreats, leading the Phantom on a chase out of the city. More on that a little later. There are a pair of short stories Sanderson wrote for the Mistborn adventure game produced by Crafty Games: The 11th Metal, set before the events of the Mistborn novel, and Allomancer Jack and the Pits of Eltania, set somewhere in the time frame of Alloy of Law. Hoid does not appear in either short story, which can probably be explained by their lack of importance to the mainline stories of the series. These stories are still worth reading to add more background to the world of Scadrial, and they're both included in Arcanum Unbounded, so you don't have to buy the games. In the Alloy of Law, over 300 years after Sazed took up both ruin and preservation and remade the world, Wax notices a beggar at the wedding where Steris is kidnapped by Miles 100 Lives and the Vanishers. This is the second hardest find in the Mistborn series, and the second of 3 cameos that don't use Hoid's name openly. The beggar actually converses with the newlyweds briefly during dinner, but it's not clear if Hoid was present when the Vanishers killed the retired constable or when the fighting started. Shortly after the events of the Alloy of Law, Hoid can be seen in Shadows of Self driving Wax's coach. His only appearance is when Wax speaks with Harmony via earring about Bleeder. Hoid lets Wayne sit next to him while Wax has some privacy in the back for his conversation with God. But that's all we get from him in the second Wax and Wayne installment. The events of the Bands of Mourning take place only half a year after Lessie's second death. While in New Saren, Wax and Ceres attend a party at Lady Kelasina's house. When entering, a beggar appears from the bushes asking Wax for money. The beggar identifies himself as Old Hoid, acts as if he's blind again, and says that he technically owns the property. After Wax gives him some money, Hoid hurls the coin directly at Wax, giving away that Hoid is not blind at all. Wax later identifies the coin as a Malwish medallion, capable of granting a ferrochemical ability such as weight or warmth. In this case, it's a copper-mined medallion, storing a single memory. The memory is from a man with scars on his arms who tells a village of freezing people to survive. Hoid's role in giving this medallion to Wax is his only contribution to the novel, and Wax does not connect the beggar's name to his carriage driver back in Elendel. Some readers tackle Mistborn's secret history after The Hero of Ages, but it was published almost as a companion to the Bands of Mourning. We won't go into everything about that story, but in part 2, the Drifter approaches the well while Kelsier is stuck within its boundaries. This is in fact Hoid, the third Mistborn appearance of the character without using his name. The Drifter eats a nugget of Lerasium to make himself a Mistborn, and eventually punches Kelsier in the face, leaving the survivor stunned in his prison. This occurs sometime during the events of the second novel, The Well of Ascension. Later, when Vin is heading to meet with Hoid in Fadric City during the events of The Hero of Ages, Kelsier is the one who leads Vin away from Hoid, as he thinks the informant is dangerous. It's unclear how the interaction would have gone without Kelsier's intervention, but he wants to avoid the man as much as possible after their altercation at the well. While Kelsier doesn't directly connect the Drifter to the street informant from the first novel, he is able to identify the man in further stories. In The Lost Metal, Hoid has remained Wax's coach driver since his introduction in Shadows of Self, but as his largest role in any Mistborn novel to date. Aside from ferrying the Ladrians around Elendel, he joins the constabulary's sting on the set's bilming operation. He rides with Wayne in a separate truck from Marasi, whose driver is actually Moonlight, a member of the Ghostbloods. While Wayne and Marasi recognize him, they both move on fairly quickly with everything else going on. Wayne even talks to Hoid most of the ride to the edge of the basin, recounting everything he knows about pickling vegetables. Moonlight notes that she isn't certain if she is watching Hoid or if he's watching her. There are more details here when we talk about the Cosmere short stories, but suffice to say, Kelsier and the Ghostbloods don't like Hoid. Though Hoid doesn't participate in the fight at the initial warehouse in Bilming, he rejoins the story at the very end. He steers a small boat to pick up Wax from the waters outside of Elendel following the harmonium explosion triggered by Wayne. Hoid's timely rescue of his employer allows for the epilogues of The Lost Metal to include Wax's POV to close out Mistborn Era 2 and all of the published Mistborn content as of 2025. Okay, now we're going to move over to the world of Elantris, known as Cell. In Sanderson's first published novel, Hoid appears as a beggar, one of his favorite disguises. Sereni tasks him with delivering a shipment of secret weapons to the city of Elantris, but these weapons did not prove to be effective in the climax of the story. Hoid is also the point of view character in the postscript of the original Cosmere novel. Just following the restoration of Elantris, he unwraps his bandages, hoping to find himself turned into an Elantrian, but is not transformed as he wished. He does this next to the small glowing pool of liquid high up on the mountain overlooking the city, the same pool where Raoden had the epiphany about the chasm line, the city layout, and the Aeon door. Hoid discusses his disappointment with a darkly glowing sphere called a Skaze, seemingly the opposite of a Sion, who calls him Hoid. After reveling in the idea that there are more puzzles to solve, following his failure to become an Elantrian, he drops into the pool and disappears. While the weapons Hoid delivered didn't directly impact the main story of Elantris, and he vanished from the planet entirely, his efforts weren't completely in vain. The short story, The Hope of Elantris, shows the events surrounding the burning of New Elantris from the perspective of Matisse, the young woman who took care of the children in the city. Daishi, who had saved her shortly after she arrived, went to gather the weapons and began the conflict that nearly led to the destruction of the city. That commotion gave Matisse enough warning to get all of the children in the roost to safety in the library. So even though Hoid doesn't appear directly in this short story, his actions indirectly led to dozens of children surviving the invasion. On the first day of the Emperor's Soul, Shay finds herself imprisoned within the pit of metal after her attempt to steal the priceless artifact. The man she was working with betrayed her and took it for himself, abandoning her. That man, described as having a hawkish face with a title of Imperial Fool, is none other than Hoid. On day 101, Shay makes her way out of the city, beginning her quest to find the Fool and take revenge. Next, let's look at the book Sanderson wrote on his honeymoon, Warbreaker. In this novel, Hoid is a storyteller that comes to visit Ciri. He tells the story of the origin of Hallandren at Ciri's request and adds visual flourishes of colorful sand, dust, and plants. The history of the land includes the descendants of Ciri's family from the original Returned, as well as the complexities of the Many War and the Lifeless. Hoid also teaches Ciri that the God Kings pass away shortly after they bear a child, which upsets the Idrian princess now falling for Susebron. She asks him how he learned his storytelling methods, and Hoid gives a cryptic answer, which she attributes to his desire to give flair to every one of his stories. This is Hoid's only cameo in the novel, but it takes up almost the entirety of chapter 32, and gives Ciri and Lightsong valuable information that comes into play during the climax. In the short story that takes place on Threnody, the truth behind Hoid's role or non-role is as opaque as the shades that haunt the forest. For many years, people attempted to find the Hoid cameo in this story, but Sanderson said he intentionally didn't include him in the story due to its lack of importance to the Cosmere. In spite of this, his VP of editorial, Peter Ahlstrom, has contradicted him multiple times over the decade since the story was published. That includes this comment from 2024, saying Sanderson agreed that Ahlstrom was correct, that Hoid is in fact in the story. This seems like a great question for someone to ask Sanderson at a convention or spoiler stream to finally get the answer straight from the source. Until then, which side are you on? Do you think Hoid is in this story or not? I'd say there are a few candidates that could be Hoid, but this would definitely be the hardest Hoid discovery given the swirl around the topic. Throughout the Stormlight archive, Hoid takes a much more prominent role, though he is only known as Hoid to a select few people on Roshar. To most, he is known as the King's Wit, and indeed, that's how we're introduced to him. He pokes fun at the Light Eyes and amuses Elokar, but mysteriously vanishes and appears without telling others what he's doing. Given his extended scenes, we'll focus on the most important moments. The court jester is first introduced in part 2 of The Way of Kings, where he amuses Elokar and assists Dalinar in understanding the rumors about his episodes. But his biggest contribution is the story of the Wandersail that he tells Kaladin in part 4. This story gives Kaladin the understanding of responsibility when he's trying to decide whether to pursue his powers or not. The King's Wit tells Kaladin that he can call him Hoid and plays a flute so well that it echoes up from the chasms at the edge of the war camp. Following the story, he gifts the flute to Kaladin and flees the Shattered Plains, then shows up in Kholinar in the epilogue of the novel. It's here he explains the most important thing to people is novelty and timeliness, and welcomes the man with the shard blade claiming to be Talm, Herald of the Almighty. Hoid's role in Words of Radiance is even greater than in the first novel, though the name Hoid does not appear in this novel. According to the interlude from Talm's perspective, Wit started with the Kholin men and the Madman on the journey from Kholinar to the Shattered Plains, but then disappeared. Wit rejoins the Alethi court at the Shattered Plains and meets Shallan, an unexpected reunion for the young woman courting Adolin. In one of Shallan's flashbacks, Hoid can be seen discussing with Shallan's father at the dueling grounds of the Middlefest Fair. He later pointedly asks if Spren speak to her, and even coaxes a rudimentary lightweaving out of her. Hoid also encourages her to continue working on her brothers, who were improving through her small efforts. Wit is known only as a messenger to Shallan at this first meeting, but she remembers him fondly upon seeing him again. Wit also chides Kaladin for losing the flute he gifted the Bridgeman when Dalinar negotiated for every Bridgeman in Sadeas' war camp. The flute apparently has a long history, but without it, Wit plays a guitar-like instrument while conveying the story of Fleet to Kaladin while he is imprisoned. The Ardent Xyle later even mentions the alias Dust for Wit when discussing his whereabouts with Kaladin. Rock also has a story of meeting Hoid, referring to him by his Horneater name and describing him as having white hair, angular face, and being the god of travel and mischief. The epilogue of Words of Radiance is less about Wit than it is about Yasna's return from Shadesmar following her supposed death in part 1, but he tells the story about art and expectations to a Kremling and a pair of Songlings, which is the same story he told to Shallan back at Middlefest. In her novella Edgedancer, which is set at the end of Words of Radiance, Lift recalls meeting Hoid, calling him Ol' Whitehair. After making a crude joke about the appearance of the architecture, she says it's okay because Hoid said it's not crass when talking about art. Her Spren Wendell isn't sure to trust his word, and even points out that he intentionally subjected himself to the insides of a Maribethian great shell, something Lift and Wendell apparently witnessed along with the rest of a crowd. As far as we can tell, Hoid doesn't appear directly in this novella, likely because he was busy welcoming Jasnah back from the dead. Hoid has a pair of stories in Oathbringer, and the first is to a crowd in Kholinar. Shallan, disguised as Veil, spots him using various materials to help visualize his tale. While he narrates to the crowd, he notices Shallan, despite her light weaving, by using a jar of black and white sand. The story he tells the growing number of Alethi is one of Mishim, the first moon, who comes down from the heavens to trade places with the Natanatan Queen Sa for a night. Mishim wanted to shirk her duties as a moon, but Sa had a plan as well. She wanted to gain a child of the heavens through Mishim's brother, the moon Noman. Noman's blue light is what gives the Natan people their blue skin, and Mishim has never dared leave her post again. Wit's masterful storytelling is on full display here, with smokes and materials to go along with his narration. Sigil tried to tell this story to Kaladin earlier in the book, but was not successful. Hoid has the ability to tell stories and have them mean something, but let the audience assign their own meanings. Hoid later tells Shallan the story of the girl who looked up, a story Shallan partially told Pattern in the empty lecture hall in Urithiru earlier in the novel. Shallan is at her lowest point of the book when Hoid finds her, after her actions led to the death of a beggar child, and this story does have a moral this time. Wit tells Shallan that she is the girl who stood up, and she must accept the pain, but not accept that she deserved it. With that, the man leaves Shallan to make her own decision. Shallan is able to use this encouragement to stand up again and return to the tailor's shop where Adolin is waiting. In the epilogue of Oathbringer, Hoid remains in Kholinar, now in control of the singers and fused, and the state of the humans remaining in the city is very bleak. Hoid coaxes a girl away from her mother's dead body and brings her to a woman who lost her own child in the conflict. Wit is disguised in beggar's clothes again, blending in with the rest of the desperate humans, and uses his appearance to sneak into the palace. Here, the fused are working to break down a part of the palace walls, searching for something. There is a distinct blood stain on the floor here, and Wit fools his way up to the wall and speaks to a cryptic hiding in the cracks of the stone. Hoid says he is there to rescue the Spren, even if it would prefer someone better to bond. Instead of continuing to hide in the stone to eventually be found by the fused, the Pattern joins Hoid, who tells the Spren, "Life before death, little one." This is the same cryptic that Elokar was about to bond when Moash attacked in part 3. And the King's Wit has come to save the Spren from where his king fell weeks before. This is the most direct good we've seen Hoid do in his time on Roshar so far. The second novella of the series, Dawnshard, covers Rissen's voyage to Aemia, the lost nation off the western coast of the Rosharan continent. As the crew discovers the nature of Nikli and the presence of the Sleepless, Rock's daughter, Cord, says that Lunuanaki had warned her grandmother and the Horn-Eaters about these creatures. As we've discussed already, Wit's identity in the Horn-Eater Peaks has been known for generations. Once again, Hoid does not appear directly in this novella. In Rhythm of War, Hoid's role is slightly diminished, but is more direct than previous books that focus more on storytelling. The Queen's Wit is in a relationship with his queen, although Jasnah does not prefer the physical side of the romance as much as the mental aspects. He assists in discussing with the two heralds, Ash and Taln, as well as providing refreshments for Jasnah on the battlefield in Emu. While on campaign, Jasnah uses Wit to enact her plan to oust Ruthar from the ranks of Alethi High Princes as the last standing against her rule. Shortly after that, Hoid notices that one of his pens is actually a Kremling, indicating that a Sleepless is spying on him. We don't know what it is the Sleepless wanted, but it's likely they got it considering they deceived Wit. The story Wit tells in this novel is to Kaladin when he is about to die from his wounds in Urithiru. But Wit is not at Urithiru, and Kaladin's mind has been transported to Braze by Odium to manipulate him. So Wit creates a shield around Kaladin to feed him some stew and tell him the story of the dog and the dragon, a fan favorite. Kaladin uses this time to let his mind recover, and eventually Lift is able to heal his physical body so he can wake for the climax of the novel. Wit's intervention to help Kaladin in the face of Odium's mental bombardment is another large step in Hoid's impact on these stories. The Rhythm of War epilogue, titled Dirty Tricks, is a consequential chapter in Hoid's life. This is where he determines something has changed with Odium, but his memories are tampered with and the interaction is repeated without his knowledge. We cover this in our video Prepping for Wind and Truth on the Unmade and Shards, so go check that out after this. Finally, in the latest installment of the Stormlight Archive, Wit sends Kaladin on his quest westward with a replacement flute, instructing him to practice until he is good enough for the wind to return his melody. Hoid doesn't give a story to Kaladin though, telling him he needs to write his own story this time. He does teach Kaladin that what he has been doing since leaving the military in Rhythm of War is called therapy. This is by no means Hoid's biggest impact on this story, and will cover the epilogue, his activities surrounding the Exist Dawnshard, his relationship with Yas not ending, and his open threads in a separate Stormlight video. But in a new development in this novel, Hoid is able to commune with off-world dragons using a mysterious bone. Wit does this early in the novel when the Coalition is trying to understand what the contract means for their strategy, and his communications with Frost's sister determine they must protect the lands they hold for 10 days or forfeit them to Odium. This sets up the entire immediate conflict that preempts the contest of champions, spreading the Coalition thin ahead of the 10th day. In any case, by the end of the novel, Hoid is on a different planet and vows to tell the true story of Dalinar Kholin. Now Wit is barred, at least temporarily, from returning to Roshar without running into time dilation issues, and I'm sure his presence will be missed by many. Within Sanderson's first secret project, Hoid is both the narrator of and a character within the story. The narration has all the trademark storytelling style of Hoid, but his character in the story is changed. Hoid has a curse that removed his 5 senses. No, not the standard senses like sight and touch. The 5 senses he lost to the sorceress are humor, decorum, purpose, self, and taste, as in style. This led to Hoid's horrid outfit and behavior throughout the majority of the novel, but was integral to his arc. It turns out Hoid traded being cursed by the sorceress for a chance to join an exclusive club if he could beat her in the bet, which he couldn't reveal to anyone. Hoid ends up being the final piece to stop the sorceress from cursing Tress at the end of her quest, after Tress and Charlie are able to break the crew into the tower. Hoid also gives us the fantastic term for the mostly nameless background characters of these fantastic stories, Dougs. Sorry to anyone out there named Doug, please know that you're more than a Doug. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is Sanderson's third secret project, and while Hoid takes on the narrator role again, he is frozen in place and used as a coat rack for the vast majority of the story, much to Design's delight. At the end of the book, after Yumi defeated the machine and the shroud dissipated, Hoid recovers and removes the coats and hats that were hung on him throughout his lockdown. Hoid explains that when they arrived, something tried to consume his investiture, so his self-defense mechanisms activated automatically, freezing him in a state perfect for a coat rack. Hoid wants to leave the planet of Kamashi immediately, despite the diminished danger, and asks Design to steal a spaceship with him. Originally thought to be the final secret project, the Sunlit Man has a very brief Hoid appearance at about the quarter mark of the book. Hoid appears to Nomad via connection manipulation by auxiliary, creating a projection of Sigzil's old master. The relationship between Wit and Sigzil is strained, at least partially because Wit abandoned his apprentice in a dangerous situation in Alethkar. Wit previously asked Nomad to carry a Dawnshard, which led to the near demise of auxiliary. We won't get into the specifics of the Dawnshard here, but Nomad resents Hoid because of the danger he unknowingly took on. The Night Brigade is hunting Nomad, forcing him to jump from planet to planet as they are hunting him for a connection to the Dawnshard, but he no longer holds it. Nomad infers that if he were to be caught, Hoid would be next on their target list. Hoid attempts to persuade Nomad that asking questions is enough, even when sometimes there aren't any answers, before apologizing for ruining his apprentice's life. A rare sentiment that surprised Nomad despite knowing the man for a very long time. In the original story, Sixth of the Dusk, which was released as part of the anthology Shadows Beneath back in 2014, and then included in Sanderson's Cosmere collection Arcanum Unbounded, released in 2016, Hoid is actually not present throughout the work, which makes sense because the entire short story takes place on the island of Pachi, with Dusk isolated except for his Aviar and Vathi. In the full release of Isles of the Emberdark in the summer of 2025, the original short story makes up flashbacks contained within the first part of the novel. Hoid is initially mentioned in the second part as Master Hoid, who taught Starling and brought the refugee sleepless Chrysalis onto the crew of the ship, the Dynamic. It seems the ship was owned by Hoid previously, with the full flamboyant title of The Dynamic Storyteller's Incredible Conveyance. Hoid supposedly once solved a murder case on Tzitzil's home planet, the Grand Apparatus. but we learn that Hoid has disappeared as usual, leaving Starling to watch over the crew and the sleepless Chrysalis to fend for herself. Hoid later explains to Starling that he leaves his apprentices so they can learn to survive and improve their situation on their own. And oddly enough, Hoid has this conversation with Starling through the Spirit Shores, a section of the spiritual realm where dragons commune and build monuments to draconic legends, despite not being a dragon himself. This means Isles of the Emberdark is the second secret project where Hoid does not physically appear. We also learn more about Hoid's personal life in his communion with Starling. Hoid has a wife, but apparently she doesn't remember being his wife. We don't know her identity, but Hoid has previously dated a dragon. He also alludes to the twins, implying they are potentially his children, though they could be other apprentices. Hopefully they help Hoid out of the vault he was trapped in during the conversation. Okay, so we've gone through each of the individual stories in the Cosmere, and Hoid appears in nearly every one of them. But there are also cases where the man's actions are best explained by knowledge of multiple books. Quick spoiler-free disclaimer. This section will be devoted to Hoid's appearances or actions that connect multiple Cosmere stories across series, some of which are not directly confirmed in the text. It's best to have all of the Cosmere under your belt for this section, but the tags will be explicit about which books we're going to discuss, so proceed with caution if you aren't caught up or jump to this time tag to avoid spoilers. At the end of Elantris, Hoid fails to become an Elantrian as he thought he would. But by the time Tress and the crew reach the Sorceress's tower and Hoid confronts her, it's clear he has become an Elantrian, capable of commanding the Aeon Door. This was part of his bet with Rihanna that if he won, he would become an Elantrian. At this point, Hoid now has access to the invested art he's chased since the first published work of the Cosmere. Hoid's storytelling in Warbreaker and Oathbringer share many traits, including the vibrant dust visuals that complement his narration. This is some kind of non-Rosharan proto-lightweaving that Hoid had access to before bonding the cryptic in the epilogue. It's unclear if Hoid is aware of Vasher and Vivenna's presence on Roshar under their aliases as Zahel and Azure, and we never saw Hoid meet them in Warbreaker. The epilogue of Oathbringer also includes Hoid's use of breaths to animate the doll he uses to lure the young girl out of the darkness. He even gives the doll a second command to take care of the girl. When discussing news of Helleran with Shallan's father Lyn at the Middlefest Fair, Hoid puts a powder in his own drink. This is probably a metal powder that Hoid ingests for allomancy, most likely emotional allomancy to manipulate Lyn. Given Hoid's status as a Mistborn, he has probably used emotional allomancy on other Rosharans without their knowledge. At the end of Rhythm of War, after Shallan has decided to go against the Ghostbloods, Hoid has a message for Shallan to give the Ghostbloods leader. Deal with your own stupid planet, you idiot. Don't make me come over there and slap you around again. This is a direct reference to Hoid's altercation with Kelsier at the Well of Ascension. When Wit is able to intervene to help Kaladin with the Dog and the Dragon story, he uses an allomantic speed bubble to give them extra time to eat stew and discuss the story. Wit is only able to hold this bubble for so long due to expending his bend alloy like Wayne uses in Mistborn Era 2. The epigraphs of Rhythm of War Part 2 are a letter from Harmony, who had recently been formed as a dual shard. Sazed agrees with Hoid's concern for Odium and asks him to make himself known the next time he is on Scadrial. In Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, Hoid narrates to a Rosharan audience, referencing things like chulls, friend, and customs on Roshar. Following his harrowing encounter with Taravangian as the new Odium in the epilogue of Rhythm of War, Wit created protections for himself to avoid having his investiture manipulated again. This lockdown mode is what led to his state through most of the book, as the machine attempted to consume his investiture upon arriving on Komashi. At the end of Wind and Truth, Hoid wakes up on Scadrial after being vaporized by Retribution following the combination of the shards of Odium and Honor. His arrival is just before the events of the Alloy of Law, and he remains on Scadrial for at least the next 6 years through the end of the Lost Metal. Hoid also mentions Sazed in Wind and Truth and hopes he will get to meet him. Well, he certainly has that chance now, but we don't see a moment directly between the two immortal beings in Mistborn Era 2. As we talked about earlier, Hoid and Moonlight have a reciprocating relationship where they monitor each other. Moonlight is in fact Shay from the Emperor's Soul. She doesn't just know him from her time on Scadrial, she knows him from his betrayal during the opening sequence of her short story. If Shay makes an appearance in the next Mistborn era, seeing her interact with Hoid more would be great. We mentioned that the events of the end of Wind and Truth between Hoid and Sigil will be covered in another video, but this is the point where Wit asks Sigil to take on the Dawnshard that is alluded to within the Sunlit Man. Sometime between the events of these two books, Ox is fed upon by the Exist Dawnshard, as the weapon attempted to use a source of power, and the High Spren was the nearest investiture. While we don't know the actual events, Hoid has previously given the Dawnshard away and retaken it, so it's possible that Hoid has the Dawnshard yet again by the time of the Sunlit Man, which is likely the reason that the Night Brigade would begin chasing him if they were to capture Sigil. And despite Hoid saying he was wrong to give Sigil the Dawnshard just before Retribution destroyed him, a Dawnshard in the hands of Taravangian would likely have been a calamity. The spacecraft that Hoid and Design head to steal at the end of Yumi and the Nightmare Painter could be the same spacecraft seen in Isles of the Emberdark, the dynamic storyteller's incredible conveyance. This hasn't been confirmed, but the timeline is possible. We just don't know much about this era of the Cosmere yet. Another good question to ask Brandon. Across these stories, Hoid has gone by many names, including Sephandrius, Wit, Midius, and others here on screen. I'm sure we'll learn of another nickname or alias in the second half of the published Cosmere that is yet to come. Finally, all of the Cosmere stories are connected by investiture, and usually invested arts such as Surge Binding, Allomancy, and the Aeon Door. Hoid seems to be collecting as many invested arts as he can, though the purpose of that goal is not yet known. To date, he is capable of each of these invested arts that we have seen directly on page. It's not clear if he has sufficient knowledge to use arts like Hemalurgy from Mistborn or Sprouting from Tress, but it's a good bet given his long life that has spanned over 10,000 years since the Shattering. The Exist Dawnshard probably prohibits Hoid's use of Hemalurgy as it was known pre-Cassandra, but as of the Lost Metal, that art no longer requires killing people, so it could be possible. We don't know much about the lead up to the Shattering, where Hoid was directly involved in killing Adonalcium with 16 other people, who each became the shards we know in the modern Cosmere. What specifically drove Hoid to choose not to take up a shard is not yet clear. That story will be told in the Dragonsteel trilogy, as one of Sanderson's final works in the Cosmere. What other invested arts will Hoid collect by the time we learn his origins? Hoid is also collecting apprentices, including Sigil and Starling. He says in the latest Cosmere publication, Isles of the Emberdark, that he takes on apprentices who will care, not ones who are competent storytellers. The Order of World Singers on Roshar was founded by Hoid during the Heraldic Epics, and Hoid has had many apprentices within the organization and outside of it throughout the millennia. Hoid uses his history on Roshar to teach Starling about Noadon, who organized the Knights Radiant to protect against the repeated societal collapses following the Herald's deaths. Despite Hoid's claims that his stories do not have a moral, he certainly uses them as teaching tools quite often. This is a very long video on one character, but that character has at least a mention in 22 or 23 of the 26 Cosmere prose stories published as of 2025. As part of Sanderson's 2026 crowdfunding campaign, we will get 2 Hoid-focused offerings. The first will be 4 illustrated picture books of some of Hoid's stories from the Stormlight novels. The second will be Secret Project number 6, The Fires of December. This will be the 3rd entry in the series Sanderson is now calling Hoid's Travails, joining Tress of the Emerald Sea and Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. We'll have to wait to see what unique misfortune befalls Hoid in the new novel. Hoid is extremely important to the Cosmere as a whole, and since this is about the halfway point of the planned publication, there are plenty more opportunities for Hoid to tell more stories and affect the universe Sanderson is crafting. To top that off, Sanderson announced that the Cosmere has been picked up by Apple TV for adaptation. With Hoid's different appearances across, and sometimes within, novels, it will be interesting to see how he is portrayed, and who is cast as Hoid in Mistborn movies and a Stormlight show. So what do you think about Hoid and his cameos in the Cosmere? How many did you already know? Do you think I missed one? Let me know in the comments, but watch your spoiler tags for the new readers. If you have questions, I'll be sure to answer them. These videos wouldn't be possible without the awesome fan art from the incredible artists of the Cosmere community. Links to each of the artists' accounts can be found in the description. Check them out. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe for future videos. After all, we need to unarchive all these secrets.